live.
Mhm, mhm.
All righty. Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison. I'll be your host for the evening. I'm the Director of Programs with NAMI North Carolina. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness of North Carolina. I'm glad you're here. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of creating conversations and really building community on the topic of mental health. Our guest tonight is Kartar Diamond. She is a California resident and NAMI member and author of the book, Noah's Schizophrenia, A Mother's Search for the Truth. And this one ranks right up there. I hear a lot of stories with NAMI of families going through the ringer, and definitely Kartar has a story to tell. I can't wait to hear it, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. As usual, the first part of our show will be a conversation with Kartar, our guest. Next, we'll show our video of the week, and then we'll take questions from you, our virtual studio audience. Now, a word from our sponsors. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Block Grant Fund. We appreciate their guidance and support. Now, without further ado, Kartar Diamond, I hope you don't mind my saying this, is a NAMI mommy and also a classically trained expert in Feng Shui. Until 2002, she published only books, articles, and course materials on that subject, Feng Shui. Now, I looked up how to say that. Hopefully, I'm close. Since publishing Noah's Schizophrenia, she's been a frequent guest speaker with NAMI family support groups and other NAMI events. One of her goals is to help other family members like her expand their coping skills, resources, and advocacy. Welcome, Kartar.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. So we'll get right down to it. You cover a lot of ground in your book. For those who haven't read us, tell us your story in a nutshell.
Well, going back now 14, almost 15 years ago, my wonderful, seemingly normal son started to display some really strange behavior. In fact, in the first chapter or two, I kind of unravel a very common scenario where parents often start thinking, is this teenage hormones? Is this drug use? What's going on? So I take the reader through, I call it my memoir, but it's really as much or more about my son and how we affect each other. And so we went through this whole journey of trying to find the correct diagnosis, trying to find the appropriate treatment, trying to find the appropriate housing when it became clear that he couldn't live at home. And you've read it, Peggy, so you know that the doors kept slamming in front of us, one wrong turn after the other. And a parent's grief and frustration combined with the fact that my son was just continually getting worse and worse for a decade. So I thought it was important to add our story to the mix about how schizophrenia in particular, or mental illness in general, are still greatly misunderstood, heavily stigmatized, even stigmatized by people within the mental health care industry, if you can believe that. The way it changes the family dynamic, the way it changes our relationships with friends as well. And the lack of resources that are still, troubling us, because one of the things I think that I conveyed and even articulated in the memoir was that as troubling and as upsetting as schizophrenia is in our family, I have often felt like the lack of continuum of high quality care was worse. I have one chapter in the book called Insult to Injury, and I was thinking that could be the title of the book at one point, because I was feeling like it's bad enough that we have this mental illness, this brain disorder that there's no cure for, but now we're getting insults and neglect and cavalier attitudes by people who should be helping us. So that's what happened to us for a long, long time. And fortunately, things did get better, but that's that's our story of a teenage son just going off the rails and not understanding for a while what was really going on.
Mhm. I think one of my favorite NAMI expressions is that mental illness is not a casserole disease. Someone goes to the hospital with a heart attack, their community of friends, church, whatever, encircles them and brings food, and there's so much support. With mental illness, not so much.
No, I was the only one that would visit him in the hospital, and it was just and so as a parent, I would say that for any parent or caretaker, it might be a friend, it might be a brother or sister, any involved caretaker, 100% of us get depressed at some point about what's not working. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
So your son, as you mentioned, walked an incredibly difficult road. It seems to me there is a theme with schizophrenia that they're doing very well as a young person. They're very successful. Maybe they have some extraordinary talent, as your son did with music. And so then when they get sick, the fall feels very dramatic. Tell us about Noah before and after his illness.
Yeah, that's very true. I know that the general public has a lot of misconceptions about mental illness and thinking that the child might have, or the person might have come from a home where there was child abuse or neglect or what have you. And part of the stigma. But my son, I describe him as being better than average when before the illness took hold. He was adorable, smart, very funny, very gregarious, gifted student, got A's without trying. I think the only thing he wasn't was a star athlete. I mean, he was more like the cerebral type and the musician, and I just loved being his mom, and he just kept me laughing. I'll tell you one funny. The first joke he told me when he was about 3. I had a dear friend whose birthday happens to be today, and this is going back 27 years ago. She was the personal chef to the late Michael Jackson, the entertainer Michael Jackson. And he used to give her gifts, and she would give me the gifts, like the hand-me-downs, things she didn't want, like a Sony TV or Michael Jackson videos or what have you. And I remember one time I put my son as a toddler in the living room and set him up to watch a Michael Jackson concert video. And the audience is chanting, "King of Pop, King of Pop, King of Pop." And he toddles into the dining room and he looks at me and he says, "Michael Jackson is the king of poop." And so, I mean, things like that were coming out of his mouth daily. And I just thought I was raising the next great comedian, that he was just going to have us laughing our whole lives. So he was the before Noah, quote unquote Noah. That's not his real name, but he was a delight. And also because he was such a good boy, I didn't have to be a strict authoritarian type parent. So when he started rebelling as part of the disease, I didn't know what was going on. It was such a departure. And then the alienation came out, and then the paranoid statements started coming out. And it was like a different person, really, that took over. So it's pretty dramatic, as it is with other parents. Although, I have a few friends who said that their child was always a bit eccentric or introverted, that they sort of knew that they were a little different. There's such a thing as, well, I wanted to say dual diagnosis. That has a whole other meaning these days, but there are people who have more than one co-occurring mental illness or personality disorder on top. And so, sometimes we see that a person has various problems or eccentricities before the illness really manifests in a big way.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, not mine though.
Yeah, yeah, it does sound like it was just a complete shock. Um, and
Yeah.
so then he was getting into services, or you were trying to get him into services. And many of us know, if you're involved with NAMI, you probably know the mental health care system is disjointed, it's complex, it's riddled with problems. And I've been involved with NAMI for 10 years, so I'm never surprised to hear stories of people having a hard time getting into services. Maybe there's a several months wait or whatever. I was surprised at how bad some of the services your son received were. The doctor who encouraged the out-of-state boarding school, and then the boarding school itself came to mind. Could you talk about that? And do you have any advice for parents who are in those shoes right now?
Well, each community is different. Each county offers different services, but I would say, make a pest out of yourself. Find out. Don't be shy. Don't be embarrassed to ask for help, and even ask for special treatment for that matter. Um, I've talked at a dozen or so NAMI groups, and it's interesting because one NAMI group that I talked to, I think it was in Georgia, the state of Georgia, they said that they don't have any IMDs, which are the locked facilities. Another place said they didn't even have board and cares. So if somebody is hospitalized, they're just discharged back to their family or the street. And so here I come from Los Angeles, where we have supposedly a lot of services available. And yet there's such a sheer volume of people that need help that the system is overburdened. And then there's still lack of quality in the services we do have. So we're all kind of in the same boat.
Mm.
And so I would just say that you have to find out as quickly as possible what really is available in your community. And NAMI, when I was in Los Angeles and going to NAMI family support meetings, there were people who were further along than me who were the facilitators in the group, and they could say, oh, you're having a problem in this area, call the Department of Mental Health directly, or you're having a problem here, call the Office of Patients' Rights. Who knew that there was one? In fact, sometimes there are agencies and there are social workers and people who can help, but they kind of keep it a secret. You don't see it on TV with commercials so much. And so I would say to not be in denial. Worst case scenario, well, best case scenario is that you overreact and that you try to get services for somebody who may not really need them. But our story was the opposite, where I took not too long, but longer than I should have in retrospect to do certain things and to respond certain ways. If a psychiatrist that was assigned to you through the county seems distant and flippant and not real concerned about your loved one, ask for somebody else to take over. There's a lot of things that you can do. And uh, there's that saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's also very good for parents, other family members, to band together, not just in the meetings, not just in the NAMI walks, but to actually try to help problem solve for each other. And I'm involved with this group of mothers that we all met through NAMI, and we're doing something independent of NAMI, but we're trying to make the Department of Mental Health more accountable to the contracts that they get into with these agencies that are supposed to help our loved ones. We're trying at this point to find out whether or not those agencies are violating their own contracts, or whether their contracts are just vague enough that they really aren't providing the level of care that our loved ones need, and that maybe the Department of Health can put a little pressure on them to start agreeing to do more things. Some of it is incredibly basic, like even in COVID, where they don't let parents come and visit. How about letting your loved one have a cell phone? Simple
Mhm.
thing, stay connected. Yeah, I mean, some of
Sure.
the things that are just, that don't cost any money are
Mhm.
not being implemented for everybody's well-being. So I advise parents to get on board. In my memoir and in other sources, certainly even on NAMI National's website, I know they must have recommended reading to get you acclimated to all the terms and the acronyms and get
Right.
educated.
Absolutely.
Easier said than done if you're in the middle of a crisis, but when you're not in a crisis, try to make time to educate yourself above and beyond what NAMI's Family to Family does, which is great. Yeah.
It is that I love that grassroots activism and advocacy. One of my favorite people in Ohio was a mother with many foster children who sat down and read the Ohio Revised Code, the state law on what children with special needs are legally owed by their public schools. And she went into the public school with that document and said, hey, we need to have a talk about the services my children have been getting. That's how we hold people accountable. That's great to hear.
Mhm.
So moving right along, there's a lot we could say about getting better care. That could be its own show.
Right.
Um, Another theme with mental illness is housing problems, and you referenced the board and cares, which I think we call boarding houses here in North Carolina. You were basically Noah's personal safety net, kind of cleaning up after him and trying to get him new housing when things didn't work out. How did you manage the stress? Tell us about that.
Well, I can admit to doing some um, mild self-destructive things. I didn't handle my stress perfectly all the time. I ate a lot of chocolate. I had a lot of emotional eating. So I didn't handle things all that well all the time.
Support that.
But but before we went on air live, we were talking about books and reading and whatnot, and you made me think. Back in the 1980s, I read every self-help book imaginable. Romance, health, whatever. I was really into that. And maybe it's because it's always been a part of my personality. But I have found that getting information tamps down on my anxiety level. If there's a problem and I can find the way to solve it, my mood and spirits stay up. Now, of course, there are times when there is no answer to a situation and you have to, scale back what your expectations are. But aside from, being a workaholic, and focusing on writing and my other business, I would throw myself into my other business. That may seem odd for some people, but if I could be talking to a client for a couple of hours, I wasn't thinking about my son. So I actually found refuge in being a workaholic for a while. But then also doing the constructive things of bonding with other NAMI family members, reading, researching, trying to become an expert in this area. And, I refer to myself in the book at least once as an unpaid social worker. But, that's where we're at right now. And dealing with the stress, I tried to stay positive. And I also have a background in yoga and meditation. And so I definitely relied on my metaphysical and spiritual practices to help me get through some dark times.
Right. Yeah. And it is, I can't imagine the stress of seeing your child evicted and having to keep those basic needs in place or do everything you could within the constraints of the system and all the constraints that are out there. So that is a lot.
And think of the irony, because what I do for a living is to help people, have more balanced and happy and serene environments, particularly their homes, if not their businesses. My son's father is an architect, so the environment is so important to us. And when we saw him floundering in these places, most of them were terribly dilapidated, and the staff, they were not up to par. And so it was like a double whammy for us, because environment is so important to us as part of our professions. And uh, what I did, and again, for people listening, I don't know, every community is different, but the state of California has a website, something.gov, where you can literally look up and see where these residential homes are. You can call, you can see if they have an opening. I actually made it a sort of a part-time job, actually, to go and visit certain board and cares that might have been close to where I had a client that day, just to get it done and make notes. And whether my son would ever live there or not, I wanted to sort of identify the place and maybe tell others about it. I created a little board and care manual, actually 3 or 4 years ago. And so you got to search this out. And if you have something that's the equivalent of the Department of Mental Health in your community, they should also know where these places are located, because they've got social workers who, in theory, should be visiting people who live there.
In theory. I
Yeah.
like, yeah, I believe there is such a website affiliated with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Our helpline manager and perhaps our intern tonight will locate that, and we'll either get it out via email or perhaps it will appear in the chat box.
Yeah, and
Uh,
people, again, to shorten the task of trying to find the appropriate place, they're called adult residential facilities for adults between 18 and 59. I'm sure that's like a nationwide description. But one of the frustrating things in California is the list that had referred to. It lumps together people with developmental disabilities with those who have mental illness. And so at first I was calling a lot of places where it's like, no, we have people here with autism, not schizophrenia. And no, we don't mix them in the same household. So hopefully there are other states that have more user-friendly ways to look up the appropriate housing for your loved one.
right. Right. So many angles we could take on that. And there's the problem of young folks with mental illness ending up in nursing homes, and so the average age is like 84.
No,
Uh,
not going to help. Going to make things worse for everybody.
Seriously. So one issue you touch on is the AOT, or assisted outpatient treatment. And for those who aren't familiar, AOT is court ordered treatment for folks with serious mental illness. It comes into play when someone has a documented pattern, a legally documented pattern of becoming a threat to themselves or others, usually after they stop taking medication. It is controversial, and I've seen both sides. I've met parents and people who said AOT saved our lives, it saved our family. And of course, there's the other side where it's called forced treatment, and there are strong feelings against it. Personally, again, I see both sides. What do you say to folks who say involuntary care is inherently traumatic?
Well, we have to look at every case uniquely, for one, and within the under the umbrella of serious mental illness, there's still quite a spectrum. There are some people who are very high functioning when they are stable, and they may be stable when they're on medication, or they may be stable when their diet and their sleep and exercise is good. There's a number of ways to reach stability, and there are a number of levels of functionality. And so I know that for people who call themselves peers and people living with mental illness, um, often will take offense at the idea of involuntary treatment. And many people are thinking of the olden days, going back 80, 100 years ago, where insane asylums garnered very, very bad reputations because they were worse than prisons, and they treated people horribly and medicated people against their will. And so there's that historical precedence. And now our society has swung in the other direction, where some of my fellow advocates, we say kind of in despair that now it's considered okay to be as psychotic as you want to be. And we know that that's not that's violating somebody's civil rights also, to refuse to treat somebody when they're in a state where they cannot make rational, healthy decisions for themselves. I see it as an ultimate kindness to sometimes have guardianship or power of attorney for somebody who cannot take care of themselves. And we even use that expression, gravely ill. That's a legal term. Or danger to self and others. Most people in society, for instance, who don't know much about mental health, would probably feel it was really negligent to allow somebody to commit suicide just because it's their civil right to do with their body what they want. Um, in another level of our society, we don't let our sweet grandma roam the streets with a dirty diaper just because she can't stand the Alzheimer's unit that she's in. We would consider that horrible, to let people with dementia wander the streets and eat out of garbage cans. So it really depends on what is your goal. And then the other end is that often when we don't take care of people involuntarily, they wind up in jail or prison, and then their rights are really taken away from them with
Mhm.
people who are very unsympathetic. In fact, I remember one time a friend of mine was telling me about a young man in her community who was driving the wrong way on the freeway, and the police stopped him and they said, "We can take you to jail or we can take you to the hospital. Which do you prefer?" And he had the presence of mind to say, take me to the hospital, you know. So another topic that we could spend hours discussing, but we have to be mindful, especially people listening to this call who identify as having a mental illness, you know, and you're an advocate and you're a peer and you're actually mentoring other people. That is heartwarming. That's what that I use people like that as something that I can look forward to, as maybe someday my son might be in that mind frame and level of functionality too, where he can help other people. But for those who can't be there, for those who aren't there yet, I feel like sometimes the loved ones really do need to step in before the law enforcement steps in.
Mhm.
And then, of course, I really do feel, of course, I'm advocating for it right now, that if somebody has involuntary treatment, that it be of a really high caliber. Let's have people in that situation for as brief a time as possible. But what we've got going on in LA County now is we put people in treatment. It's not very good. They play the game for a while, and then when they're discharged to a lower level of care, they cycle right back in and it starts all over again. And anybody who has psychotic breaks or that potential, I mean, I can't describe it in really strong, you know, medical terms, but I know that each time somebody has a relapse, it gets harder and harder to bring them back to where they were before. So if we take care of people from the beginning, we're
Mhm.
going to get long term, we're going to get a much better result, and people can be more independent in their creative selves, get that back.
Mhm. I've heard the same. I've heard that the more often you go into psychosis and the deeper, longer you're there, the more your brain can actually be damaged and it's harder to come back fully. So, thank you for that thoughtful answer. To any peers who are out there listening, I just want to say I'm a peer myself. I honor your experience. I totally understand not all parents do have a person's best interest at heart. I'd like to say most do, probably most do, but I understand not all of them do. Um, it is definitely a gray area. So thank you for that answer. And I'll tell you, I wanted to hug you through the page at times because you and Noah endured so much. And like many folks with serious mental illness, he had a dual diagnosis. There was some substance use involved. How did you find out about his drug use?
Well, with one of our first therapists, he did manage, we had family therapy when he was 15, 16, and it did come out in the sessions that my son was smoking marijuana, he said 3 to 4 times a week, and that he had started when he was about 13. And I didn't know it, although, you know, I wasn't an ignoramus. I mean, I would drop him off at a friend's house, they'd have a slumber party. I'd wonder and hope if, you know, that the parents were attending to the kids, and I'd pick him up and he'd seem normal. And there didn't seem to be any reason to be concerned until he was 15.
Mm.
But the growing brain can be seriously affected by even something as now socially and medically accepted as cannabis. And so he told us in therapy that it was happening. And because he also was showing signs of being a musician by the time he was 11, I had a feeling that drug use might be in his future, but I certainly didn't assume that he would become a drug addict, or that it would possibly trigger an early onset of schizophrenia. Uh, so he wasn't totally forthcoming for a long time. In fact, he confided in somebody else at one point, and that person talked to me and told me that he was dabbling in psychedelics and cocaine. And as the years rolled by, more and more things were coming out. And you know, he was on crystal meth at one point, living in a board and care. You know, somebody living there was supplying him with crystal meth. And I understand now that that's extremely common with people with serious mental illness. I have compassion for it. Because if you were on a medication that made you groggy and sleepy and lethargic and maybe sexually impotent, then yeah, you're going to want the coffee, the cigarettes, any kind of stimulant that can make you feel alive. You know, I get it. I do that with chocolate to a certain degree, and caffeine, I get it. Um, but you know, that's so much more serious. And so throughout this whole time, you know, became aware of the drug use, but not even the extent of it. He hasn't told me everything. So,
Of course. And I have to think that's normal.
yeah.
Mm. I like the comment from Gail in our chat box. Chocolate and coffee can help a lot of things. So let's not sell that short. I agree with that. Another comment was,
Moderation.
that's right. Right. All things in in moderation. Gary is eating chocolate right now. He wants us to know. So another behavior with Noah was panhandling, and that would be so hard for a parent to learn about and see. How did you come to find out about it?
Well, it started when we brought him back from this out-of-state high school. When brought him back to LA when he was 18. We had him in this outpatient therapy program in West Los Angeles, nice affluent area, big medical complex building. And during the smoke breaks, he wasn't just smoking, he was badgering the people coming in and out of the building, panhandling. And finally, the property managers found out who he was, talked to the therapist, and he said, if this person cannot continue to be on this property, you know, if they're doing that. And of course I was horrified, humiliated. Again, you know, coming from the family, his grandpa was a doctor. I mean, it was so not our orientation towards life at all. And then there was a period of time where he was in a sober living house, and the people who run those are also very concerned about what the neighbors think and remaining in good standing in the neighborhood. But he was bothering neighbors, and it went on, and he got real good at it. And no matter how much money I gave him for spending money, you know, there was more to fuel the energy drinks and the cigarettes. And I talked about how in the memoir, how at some junctures I thought that his addiction to cigarettes was more troubling and harder to deal with than the schizophrenia, because it was all the violation of smoking rules and whatnot that were getting him evicted from one place to the next. And so even to this day, I'm not totally sure he wouldn't resort to panhandling if he really felt he needed some extra money. I have the kind of son who's very, he's not threatening looking. He's short, he's got glasses, he looks kind of friendly. And he just, I think one time I saw him and he didn't know that I saw him doing it. And he was like, oh, hi, you know, my mom's going to give me money next week when she sees me, but could you give me $1 for a soda? And then they give him $5, you know? So one time a board and care asked him, so how much money have you made, you think, from panhandling? And he was just like, I don't know, hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
But in addition to the panhandling, he was selling everything we gave him. He sold guitars, laptop computers, shoes, clothing, Game Boys, PlayStations. I mean, everything went, clothes, everything. So gets expensive.
Yeah, I imagine it's that would be that would be a lot of anxiety, I'm sure. And yeah, one thing that was really fascinating in the book was your interaction with NAMI family support group members. And I always love when people bring that up, because you can call a helpline, but most organizations are not allowed to make a recommendation or a referral to a specific entity. You know, they'll get accused of favoritism. But at the family support group, you can get the real deal from people. So how was NAMI part of your story? And how much
Well,
did that?
Yeah, I mean, piggybacking on what you were saying is that somebody could sit in a NAMI meeting and maybe not even request help, but they can learn by what other people are saying and what they've done and what's not going well. For instance, we've had I used to go weekly, and there were a couple of parents in our group where it was kind of obvious to everybody, not overtly stated, but there were some parents who were enablers. There were people who, probably should have had their son or daughter living outside the home because there was just so much codependent behavior going on that the person wasn't getting better. But the NAMI family support meetings are kind of a mix where you can ask for help outright, you can listen, you can observe of what other people are going through. Um, I remember clearly one conversation I had after the meeting, because we would stand outside and chat after the meeting. And my son had private insurance at the time, but there were some programs like FSP and AOT that he wouldn't qualify for unless he had Medi-Cal. And so that was a big decision one day when I thought, you know what, I have to drop his private insurance. They only pay for, 6 weeks of outpatient treatment anyway, whereas Medi-Cal or Medicaid might pay indefinitely, for at least the minimal amount of therapy. So I learned a lot from NAMI, and they were always directing people to lawyers and to special needs trust attorneys and to workshops on conservatorship and this program and that program, housing. It ran the whole gamut. And then we also had people in the group who recommended Al-Anon, which is, in the strictest of sense, it's for people who have family members that are alcoholic and they're codependent, but there's kind of this overlap where if you're involved with someone with a mental illness, you might need to follow some of the 12-step programs of Al-Anon also. Yes, and we had peer coaches also, one in particular who was very popular and who saw a lot of our sons. We passed his name around. So yeah, NAMI is a blessing in that regard. The family support's really genuine and very needed.
Right. Yeah. Your comment that you can go to a family support group and you can ask for help or you can just listen, you can share. That's such a good point because part of the benefit is just being in that space where it's okay to have your feelings. It's okay to have whatever family dynamic you have. And when you are able to share something to help someone else, maybe everything else in your life is going wrong and your esteem is just as low as it's ever been, but you're helping someone else, and that's an enormous boost. So,
And again, the impetus partly for my own memoir, especially for people who aren't living near a NAMI resource, was to help people realize, oh my God, they're going through the exact same thing I'm going through. Oh my God, I thought I was alone, that nobody else had those kind of thoughts or that kind of despair or frustration, to let people know that, they do have their own peers, as family members. Yeah, it's very important. And to this day, I have some very dear friends who I can't really talk to them about my son on any deep level. They've never had children. There's just a certain point, where you need to have your fellow NAMI mommies, as we say, or fathers, brothers, sisters, because sometimes even close relatives and friends, they don't want to hear it. They have no answers, and so they don't even want to ask after a certain point.
right. Yeah. It's kind of you speak the language or you don't, I guess.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I've
yeah.
lost some friends, because they probably didn't want to say, how are you? How is your son? And have me unload on them. I tried not to do that, but, it comes out. That's your life. So,
Exactly. And that's your experience. And I want to commend you for your courage. Your book does show a lot of transparency. It's it's not a book where, everyone's a hero or it's very real and everyone has a gray area and strengths and weaknesses. So um, that was a really authentic feel. So
yeah. And with the man that I was with for many of those years and what happened to us, and and yeah, it's taking responsibility for certain things, and just seeing how, yeah, it really affects everybody. It's kind of messy.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. There's a book called Nonprofits Are Messy, and I just love that title. It's true with everything, life is messy.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So you had a fairly happy ending for Noah. A tortuously long and winding road ended at a place of relative security and accountability for him. Talk about that.
Yes, and it is part of the advocacy aspect, in the larger picture, not just what happened to him, fortunately, but what can happen with other people if we band together as family members. My son finally got accepted to be in a privately funded residential program with really high quality staff and care and programs. Um, I changed the names or didn't even list the names of all the doctors and hospitals and board and cares where we had horrible experiences for liability reasons, but I did list the real name of where he is now, which is the John Henry Foundation. And they have a website, johnhenry.org. And they don't explain a lot on their website, but there are a few places like that around the country. And John Henry is like the one in Southern California, where people really do get stable. Some people live there a few years. Some people have lived there now 15 or 20 years. It's long term. You can live there as long as you need to. And consequently, they don't have very many openings because people are doing well there, and a lot of people live there a long time. Um, but they get calls, and another advocacy group that I'm a part of has decided, you know what, as much as we're doing to try to change housing in LA, we know it's going to take a decade and our sons can't wait. So we're going to try to find ways to get grants and funding and pool together in like a co-op commune kind of way to get our own housing together and follow the models of care that really work. And I would encourage people in other communities, if you don't, first of all, board and cares are not necessarily therapeutic to begin with. Some are better than others. But unless you're going to supply your loved one with all kinds of other outside curricular activities and therapies, they're just going to be warehoused at a board and care. And so some people are coming to the conclusion, we can do this together, that it's a lot more therapeutic for everybody. Some people have their mentally ill family member live at home. It might be fine, but it also might be detrimental to everybody, psychologically and or physically. And so to have, some supervised housing where, people are encouraged to have structure in their lives and whatnot, it really can make a big difference. And so, yeah, I am very happy to say that coming up on March, he'll be there 2 years, and he doesn't even realize how much better he is doing. The conversations we have, the emails, love you, mom. I mean, I didn't hear love you for, 10 years. So he's kind of back to being his affectionate, courteous self. And he's still very, very disabled. He doesn't have any insight, but he is doing better. And seeing the progress that he's made in 2 years, 10 years from now, maybe I'll be getting him his own condo. Who knows? I'm hopeful. That gives me hope.
You never know. And,
Yeah.
that I love you, that's a huge, huge milestone.
Right. I didn't need to hear it, but I'm glad that he feels that way. You know what I mean? And some people probably want to know more of the specifics of what their day is like, and they have people at different levels. They even have people who leave the campus and go to actually have jobs and go to work. But it is a place where they're served very nutritious food. They have a cordon bleu trained chef. So that's very important for your physical and mental health to get good quality food. They have a high quality doctor who comes and visits people. They take care of all of their other health and medical appointments. They have exercise. They have lots of fun activities. They have, different junctures, like during during COVID, for instance, they don't have all the activities that they used to take them, Barnes and Noble and the beach and golfing and movies. And so they're trying to do as much as possible right there where they live. And so they've brought in an art person and a therapy dog and movies out on the courtyard, so they're always thinking of how can we make this person, be calm and relaxed and feel social and feel important. And they're really good. Patience of the saints, everyone who works there.
Yeah. Well, it's just wonderful to see him in a safe and healthy place, or to read about that after such a difficult journey prior to that. And I'm sure you're better able to sleep at night and just have a little peace.
Yeah, and I even moved, to be closer to him. That was a big deal for me, but I figured this is a long-term commitment that we're making. And just to say, there are some very therapeutic places around the country, but one, you don't necessarily want your loved one to live that far away. Two, some of them are not long-term. And three, some of them are really expensive, $20,000 a month kind of expensive. And so that's another reason why I want to plant that seed in any NAMI group that I speak with. It's never too soon. If you have family members who are all talking about, we have no place for our loved one to live and it's, not right at home and blah, 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 maybe it's time to start thinking about some group housing, some shared housing on your own. The family members always have the most vested interest in their loved ones. So I'm just putting that in there, putting that out there.
I think that's a great suggestion. The system will give you some options, but thinking outside the box and taking that matter into your own hands sounds like the way to go, just based on what I've heard from so many families who struggle with that issue of housing. Yeah. So we're about to move into our halfway point. We'll show our video of the week, and I see we've got a few questions lined up from our virtual studio audience. Do you have anything you'd like to say before we turn the corner?
Me?
Yeah.
No, let's do, what you have in your program, and then whatever actual questions people have, we'll make time for that.
Sounds good.
Everybody, yeah.
Very good. So now we're going to wrap up the interview portion of the show, as I mentioned. Before we move to our video of the week, a big shout out to those working behind the scenes. We have a psychiatric registered nurse, Gail Pruitt, who's just an angel and godsend for this particular show. Our new intern, Patience Gregg, who's also supporting us on the chat box. Thank you for being here tonight, Patience, and welcome. Our fabulous intern, Eddie Simmons on tech support, who made the video I'm about to show you, and Executive Director Gary Kreitz for just being there. Of course, also, thank you so much to Carter for joining us. All right, usually the video of the week is the light part of the show, and it will be. It is a little bittersweet. Some of you have known our beautiful mascot, Roxy Morrison. She served us faithfully for the last 2 years, and sadly, she died of thyroid cancer last weekend. Rest in peace, sweet girl. Thank you for bringing so much joy to so many of us. This is Roxy Morrison, and I picked the wrong screen. All right, boy, after that awesome buildup, I'm a little bummed out now. Let's try this again. That's better.
Oh.
All right, farewell to Roxy, a beautiful part of our NAMI North Carolina family. At last, it is time for your questions. Members of our virtual studio audience, if you're new to Zoom, you may be wondering, how do I ask a question? Very simple. You click on the Q&A icon with the air bubbles at the bottom of your monitor. Type in your question, it'll magically come to us. All right, we've got one up from Christine. My son has bipolar disorder, yet when he goes off his meds, he experiences psychosis and it resembles schizoaffective. The Invega shot always works for him, yet after 4 months, he goes off as he still feels the injection will cause heart palpitations and or death. He's never had bad side effects, but would rather stay on oral meds. He's been in and out of the hospital 14 times and still can't see it. He'll not be successful until he stays on injections long term. He is 23 and a half. I guess we're looking for any words of wisdom you might have there.
Well, what came to mind, can you hear me okay, by the way?
You sound good.
Okay. When I was writing my memoir, I was consulting with, I had also read a book by Dr. Robert A. Laitman, who worked with his son's psychiatrist on creating, the infamous cocktail of medications. I mean, sorry to say that there's side effects to almost all of these medications, and then you don't want to pile on necessarily with more and perpetuate it. But it sounded like if he was only on Invega, that maybe there might be something else that could tamp down on some of his anxiety, feeling like he might die and whatnot. I never read Surviving Bipolar Disorder, but it was written by the same doctor who wrote Surviving Schizophrenia, Dr. E. Fuller Torrey. And maybe he has something that he could offer in his book that's more specific to bipolar disorder. But yeah, what you're going through is very typical, where people just, they reckon that the side effects are not worth the benefits. And, I have friends who literally made videos of their loved one when they were psychotic as a reminder of, do you really want to go there? So I wish I could offer more, but I would say, don't do nothing. Try to find if there's some other medication or some other combination of medications or some other natural therapy. Maybe a lot of exercise if he's not doing it already. I've been told that exercise is better than any antidepressant as well. So, and it has all these other wonderful benefits too. So that's what I would say on that. If I can think of anything else, I'll email Peggy and she'll pass it on to you. In fact, I don't want what's happening now to be the end. If somebody wants to ask me anything at any time, they could always email me or contact me and we're just trying to help each other.
Mm-hmm. I can vouch for Carter on that point. She responds to emails quickly. It's, yeah, that's a great attribute. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that, Christine. And we'll hope for the best for your loved one. All right. This question from Gary Kreitz. Did you find the actual process of writing the book to be difficult, therapeutic, or both? And how did you find the discipline to do it?
Well, I am a writer, so I have to confess that it was enjoyable for me and relatively easy. Staying on a diet, that's hard. Writing a book, that's easy. So I did find it very therapeutic. I also felt like I wanted it as a record that I could share with policymakers, legislators. I wanted to get some of those stories out of my head, frankly, because they were on this continuous loop. So it was kind of good to just put that aside. I didn't want to forget the timeline of certain things because that could be relevant. What was difficult was when I finally got my publisher and the editor wanted me to edit it quite a bit. And I was telling a lot of stories out of chronological order. And she said, you have to put this more in order or people are going to get lost. And so that was a humbling experience for me, and I didn't want to do it. That was the part that getting into the nitty gritty and every single typo and grammatical error. I ended up reading the book numerous times after I thought I was done with it, just trying to edit it along with the editor. So that part was hard, but I was also motivated to get it done as quickly as possible, because when they made it clear to me that it could be published this in 2020, I finished the book last March, searching for a literary agent April. Everything happened very quickly. And so I wanted to get it out. So I was, motivated to not dilly-dally around. Um, and some people have asked me if my son knows that I've written the book. And I might have said to him a long time ago, I'm writing a book about all the bad stuff that, the way we were treated by the mental health care system, but he never followed up or showed any interest. And his real name is not Noah. And I don't know if he'll ever be aware of it or interested in it. Maybe, but not now. Not right now.
Okay, thank you for that. It is an impressive feat to publish a book, and you've done several, mostly on feng shui, correct?
Yeah, totally different. And I also wanted to add on that a couple years before I got my memoir out, I actually had a little NAMI family members writing group. In fact, it came about when the leader of our NAMI family support meetings asked everybody to go around the room and say, how are you going to handle your stress this weekend? What are you going to do that's nurturing and self-care? One person said they're going to the beach or whatnot. And I said, well, I write, that's how I cope. And I said, and if anybody's ever interested, maybe one day we'll have a little writers group. 10 people raised their hands, and within a month, people were meeting at my house. And I had never led a writers group before, but I kind of looked into how those things go and gave people suggestions of things to write in case they didn't have their own ideas. And it was extremely therapeutic. People really, they had no idea how much they were keeping inside. And I would say that even if you have no commercial aspirations to write a memoir, go ahead and do it anyway. You'll find a lot of clarity. Other answers and things will come to you as you put it in writing. And we need more of these books, frankly. If anybody does have commercial aspirations, there was a time, speaking of what I do with the feng shui, there was a time in the late 90s where Barnes and Noble cleared an entire shelf away for just, books on feng shui. It was trendy back then. And we need to have bookshelves filled with family testimonies and memoirs about this to help destigmatize it. That's one angle, and also for advocacy tools. So I would definitely encourage people to get their own thoughts and feelings out in writing. Yeah.
That is wonderful. Would you like to start a group for North Carolina?
Yeah, well, we're now all living on Zoom, right? We could have a virtual writers group. Yeah. It was a very interesting process for people to go through and to be allowed to vent and really stretch out, especially since sometimes in NAMI meetings, you're limited to like talking for only 2 or 3 minutes if it's a big group. And in the West LA groups would sometimes be 20 or 30 people, and they had to cut you off at a certain point. And so so it's definitely good from that angle to express yourself.
Right, right.
Yeah.
One phrase that caught my eye in the book, where there's plenty of room for questions, virtual studio audience, if you'd like to type some in. But you mentioned the mental health industrial complex. Tell me about that.
That's me venting. I actually, there was a psychiatrist who was reading the book, and he goes, everything you're saying is true. I've had, clients and their parents tell me exactly the same things. I know you're not exaggerating, but he said, I don't want to put my name on your book because you've used some pretty derogatory terms and conspiratorial. He said, I can't quite go there. And, sometimes when you put something in writing, you don't know if somebody's saying it for, it's just like the problems we have communicating through, email and social media. Are they saying it in jest? Are they saying it in seriousness? And so for me to flippantly refer to it as the mental illness industrial complex, well, I really did feel that way when certain things seemed to be going on. If it wasn't just incompetence, it seemed to be some kind of planned sociopathic kind of experiment. It can, parents can feel paranoid too after a while when you think, why are they dropping the ball? And I relate in the memoir that little story about having just chance encounter with a former executive at the Department of Mental Health in the post office, where she confirmed that people don't really move too fast because they'd be out of a job if they were too efficient. That was coming from her mouth, not mine. And so it seems like there's this conveyor belt of things that they have people do voluntarily or involuntarily, but they don't work. And people with serious mental illness need long-term care that doesn't come to an end just because insurance or just because of this or that. And I've said this before, that from a financial standpoint, it doesn't even make sense. It costs more to have people in prison than to take care of them in a dignified therapeutic way. So if all these people are just concerned about money, including insurance companies, how about some really good quality care from the beginning so that you don't have 14 hospitalizations or 20 hospitalizations, So sometimes I just scratch my head and I get negative. I get downtrodden and kind of weary and make statements like that.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with it at all. I think this is my opinion. This is not an official NAMI position, but I see a contradiction between the profit motive and effective policy in healthcare in general. And you mentioned E. Fuller Torrey. One of his comments is that it's easier for the psychiatry profession to focus on the worried well. Okay, I'm going to admit that I have a dog here and that she's jumping on my lap. But it's easier for psychiatry to focus on the worried well. They're easier to manage. They pay on time. They show up on time. It's not at all easy to focus on folks with serious mental illness who are difficult to house and difficult to accept treatment. So,
right.
Yeah.
And the late DJ Jaffe, who wrote the wonderful book, Insane Consequences, really lays it out with hardcore statistics of what is not working with the mental health care industry, things at a national level, state level. He talks about AOT and FSP. He talks about how NAMI could be doing more on the level of advocacy and whatnot. And so then when family members start wondering, why are things not working? And why do they think I'm the enemy as the parent? And why are these HIPAA laws so counterproductive to our loved one getting the care they need? I mean, that's a whole discussion in and of itself, where family members are locked out because of the insurance privacy laws. And the parents and the family members, they often have vital information to share, and to avoid any number of tragedies. Their input is really valuable. And yet sometimes they're just, go away, you're the problem. It's just, we have to be more vocal. Yeah. There's a national group called treatmentadvocacycenter.org. They do a lot of great work. There's the National Shattering Silence Coalition, NSSC, group of people, again, trying to change the legislation. If you change the legislation, the laws, then these mental health care providers really do have to start changing the way they treat people. Sometimes advocacy sounds scary and intimidating to people, and I was never a political person, but at a certain point, you have to go that venue if you want to get what you really need for your loved one. So.
Exactly. And next question from Gary again. You are so eloquent and seem to have it all together. How do you handle it when you have a dark night of the soul in this journey?
Oh, right now I am getting a reprieve, but I still to this day have what I call phone-specific PTSD. So when my son calls me on the caller ID, I see the name. He might be just asking me if I'll bring him some food from Chipotle, but I get tense because there was a decade where a call from him was either a semi-emergency or an emergency, or him requesting something from me that was totally unacceptable or unrealistic. And so I still, I still go to those places, even though he's being taken care of right now. In fact, we had an episode a few months ago where he he didn't want to participate in the exercise anymore at the program. He's like, I'm done, and we found some creative ways to get him back on track. So I feel like I'm getting a reprieve, but it was constant for a while, and I'm sure it aged me. And in the memoir, I talk about how I actually asked a doctor for some anti-anxiety medication. I ended up not using it, but that was a pivotal point for me where I thought, I can't handle this myself anymore. I need to be medicated myself. So we shouldn't be embarrassed about it. It happens. Just kind of to highlight the amount of stress that we go through. 4 years ago, when my son was hospitalized and got conserved, I knew at that point that he would be in a psychiatric hospitalization program. I knew he would be there for at least a year. Turned out to be 2 years at 3 different locations. But when I knew that he was going to be safe at night, I wasn't going to have to wonder if he was homeless and roaming around, I made a commitment to myself. I said, you know what, Kartar, if you don't go on a diet and lose weight right now, when you have the opportunity, you're an idiot, do it. And I did. I lost 30 pounds in a year. And I'm mentioning that because the amount of cortisol level, the stress hormone, must have gone down dramatically, because it was the easiest weight loss I had ever embarked on. And I thought, wow, just because I had all that stress taken away, I was able to focus on myself. And, it was really kind of just there, very physical. And then when we had problems and he started to relapse, the stress hormone went up again. So I do what I can. I know that there's going to be times when he might say, I'm done with the John Henry Foundation. I don't want to live here anymore. There might be times when, says he wants to live there, but isn't doing what's required. Anything could happen. And that's another reason why I still advocate and will be involved with my other friends who are trying to find their own housing recovery model, because I don't know what's going to happen. My son's only 29. He's gotten better, but it would probably be naive for me to think that he's never going to have another hospitalization or there's never going to be any kind of relapse. I mean, this is a lifelong illness. So.
And if I remember correctly, he has musical instruments at his disposal now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is he a practicing musician again, or a little more active?
Yeah, like he never lost his ability to play really well. He has with him right now an electric guitar and an acoustic guitar, and somebody gave him a banjo. And the first instrument he picked up was a bass guitar, which is what I played in my youth. And when he was a little kid, he's looking up on the internet. He goes, Mom, you actually have this incredible 1960s Fender jazz bass. It's worth $3,000. He's looking up the serial number and telling me that it's worth a lot more than what I knew. And
Wow.
it wasn't long before his musical skills superseded mine, and I was like, wow, he's Eric Clapton here, this is amazing. So we'll see if he ever does anything professional with his music. I just want him to enjoy himself right now. And he does send me little MP3s of guitar riffs and things that he's doing and playing. So.
Yeah, sure. That's wonderful. Just that he's engaged with something so positive where he has so much talent. Oh, that's neat. So a question from our chat box angel, Gail Pruitt, one of the 2 chat box angels. We have patients also tonight. Are you willing to send a list of the books that you've mentioned? I'm not sure we've captured them all tonight in the chat.
Yes, I have them listed in the memoir at the back, but I could also excerpt that from the book and I could email it to you. Those I mean, it takes up a few pages of recommended websites and reading material. I have, you know, a few of my favorite authors, whether it's memoirs or just books about mental illness. Yeah. And there's also this YouTube documentary called Shattered Families that is very educational by Dr. Stephen Skinner. You know, it talks about the history of mental health care. They interview a number of family members. They interview the late DJ Jaffe, and that really explains a lot of like why things are the way they are in the United States, at least.
Shattered families. Okay.
It's about 50 minutes long.
Okay, thank you. I could scan the resource list at the end of your book if that's not a copyright violation. I'd be happy to do that too.
You have my permission as the author.
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds good. And I'm seeing some wonderful comments in the chat box. I don't know if you can see them, but so much insight and support tonight is being shared and agreement on that. So thank you for your comments and for being helpful.
Thank you.
Mhm. So what gives you hope overall when you look back on your story, on your book?
Well, I think the tide is turning. I think that, you know, I mean, sometimes born out of these tragedies, we get to this zeitgeist or this elevation in society. And, you know, prior to COVID, of course, unfortunately, there were a lot of school shootings and whatnot. And then we'd have Dr. Amador interviewed on national TV. He wrote "I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help," and about people who have schizophrenia or any mental illness where they have no insight. And so the public is starting to get that awareness, you know, about mental illness, how we need to do a better job of taking care of people so that we don't have these tragedies. And then again, unfortunately, with COVID, we've seen this incredible spike of people calling suicide hotlines, depression, mental illness on full display, the homeless epidemic, where a high percentage have mental illness. It became another public health emergency, like another layer of it when it comes to, let's say, spreading COVID in a pandemic, where again, the spotlight was once again on mental illness. And so I'm hoping that, you know, people are going to start making that more of a priority. Local budgets, state budgets, national budgets. And then there seems to be a flurry of memoirs coming out, mental illness memoirs that we call. And so again, with us advocating amongst ourselves, and you know, new advocacy groups are forming now. NAMI is great, but it's not enough. We need more local advocacy in every city. And so I'm hopeful in that regard, because I think people are now, you know, that they're saying, I've had enough. Come on already. This is, you know, it's 2021. And, you know, people rally around all kinds of other physical ailments and diseases. And this is one that hits 1% of the population. Maybe if we include bipolar disorder, we've got 2-3% of the population. Add on chronic depression and various other mental illnesses, and it's like 20% of the population has had episodes of psychosis or deep depression. And again, if you don't relate to it on a level of humanity, what about the economic toll, you know, of people who can't work and who can't survive and not taxpayers, you know? I mean, so I plead with, you know, government officials from the lowest level of what they might be able to understand is that taking care of people is less expensive than all the emergency services combined. So.
Absolutely. It's like with any area, there's preventative care. And the more we learn the language of wellness and mental health, the more we learn what early intervention should look like, the better off we all will be. I really like your theme of increasing transparency, increasing conversations about mental health. It's definitely what we're all about. Reminds me of my favorite Glenn Close quote, too. What mental health needs is more sunlight, more candor, and more unashamed conversation.
Mhm, mhm.
All right, we've got another question from Gail. Any thoughts about how we can tackle the social determinants of mental health, such as lack of housing, food insecurity, racism, these things that affect mental health? Nice softball question for you.
I know those are big topics, and I've just and that's one reason why another little group that I'm a part of is trying to make appeals with our county board of supervisors. Those are people who they've got the purse strings to a lot of programs and funding, because it is all related. It really is, and whether it's different cultures and how they handle mental illness, there's a socioeconomic factor that comes into play. I don't have all the answers. I just know that unfortunately there seems to be a lack of will within some people within the mental health care industry. Some people are on automatic pilot. There are even some clear cases of fraud. I mean, I hate to say some of these words because we're going back to that mental illness industrial complex. But like at California, as an example, we have in 2004, the millionaires tax was passed, and that fund was supposed to go towards serious mental illness. And the people who voted that in, and the millionaires who are having some of their profits go to that. I'm sure that they wanted it to go to the guy laying in the gutter who was talking to himself. I'm sure they wanted it to go to the people who needed it the most. The other side of the argument is that some of those people are hard to treat. They're not as compliant or cooperative. But now we have a portion of those funds going to people who are not seriously mentally ill. So, we've got to work on all these different levels between education and transparency and on all levels. It goes on and on, but I'm not an expert on how to bring that all together. I just, another thing about advocacy is that people should pick some portion of this puzzle that you can really, really get behind, and maybe stay in that lane. Kind of like the way DJ Jaffe said, he says, I only am focused on the 4% of seriously mentally ill people who cannot get better, and just they need to have the support to live, a safe, dignified life. Somebody like me, who's always into environment, of course, I care about housing quite a bit, maybe more so than what goes on in the hospitals. Somebody else might care more about what's all involved with conservatorship, and how to have a happy medium between somebody having a legal guardian and still having their rights, let's say. So there's a lot of things to choose from. Medication, yes or no. That's the sad part, is that there isn't one single part of the mental health care system that's really working really well. They all are hobbling along and glued together. And but pick something that you feel comfortable with. Like some people like to rescue animals, and some people want to do this or that for the environment, but just focus on what you feel good about.
Yeah, reminds me of one of my favorite recovery quotes. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So,
Right.
kind of a goofy quote, but I think it works.
Yeah.
So you've touched on this a little bit, but maybe something new will come to mind. Is there a book, song, or movie that has inspired you that you haven't mentioned already?
Well, I do, in terms of the books that I listed in my memoir, those all really, did inspire me and educate me. So we'll get that list together for people. A song, wow. I'm a musician and a songwriter in my past, so that just makes me spin out all these different things.
Many choices.
Yeah, and of course there have been movies, that literal movies that have come out in the last few years, that have featured people with mental illness. Wasn't there that movie, something, The Silver Lining, and
Silver Linings Playbook.
correct, yes. Was that Matthew McConaughey? No, it was Bradley Cooper was in that.
Right.
Yeah, so and we're seeing it in TV dramas and whatnot. There are now, in fact, Mark Ruffalo was just in a series. Now I'm escaping the title of the series, but he played a man with schizophrenia and his twin brother. So we're seeing it, more in our media and entertainment for educational purposes, to try to destigmatize mental illness. Although I'm thinking of writing an article, I'll probably do it pretty soon, about, and it's just tongue in cheek, it's just being sarcastic, about bringing stigma back. I don't know if you know where I'm going with this, but because there's a part of our society that's gotten so complacent about mental illness and homelessness. You just drive by, you've got your Starbucks latte and you see a whole encampment. That happens every day in LA, by the way. It's just overwhelming. And so I have this idea of, we should make it unacceptable. We should go back to stigmatizing mental illness, because I know that if there was somebody laying on the sidewalk in LA in 1950, full stop, brakes, call an ambulance. What's the matter with this person? People would rally around the individual that they saw who was having a hard time, because it would be so unusual. Unfortunately, now people are like, ho hum, the homeless, they want to be that way. And no, they don't. No, they don't. So there's a lot of different ways to try to perk people up and wake them up and get them out of their complacency.
Absolutely. And thanks, Patience, for digging up that title. Mark Ruffalo plays in the movie I Know This Much Is True. That one's on my list.
Mm-hmm.
I know I enjoyed reading The Soloist. I haven't seen the movie, but The Soloist is a great story that started in Cleveland, which is where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, A Beautiful Mind. Those are the classics that come to mind for me as portraying mental illness in a sincere and compelling way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, when The Soloist came out, I was really in the throes of darkness with my son, and I actually chose not to see it. I couldn't see it at that point. I thought it would make me more down. Yeah.
Yeah, I was another person with schizophrenia with musical talent. Thank you for that, Gary. Reference to Cleveland as the mistake by the lake. It's been many decades, okay, since that was the name for Cleveland.
Yeah. And another thing that gives me hope, it's been pretty pervasive again through LA County, but not every part of the country. I was involved with the crisis intervention training program, educating and training law enforcement, police and sheriffs on how to better handle people in a mental illness crisis. And I hope that program continues. I don't know if defund the police, efforts will undermine that, but I really hope that continues, because these guys, they didn't sign up to be social workers, but once they have their training and once they hear parents, if that ever comes to your community, please, as a parent, volunteer. You don't have to have the jitters of public speaking. You just go and tell what it's like as a parent, and they are listening. In fact, I often start out when I have talked in front of law enforcement, I'll say, how many of you are parents? And half of them or more raise their hand. And then when it really sinks in, when they realize this could happen to our family too, then they get very interested, they get very quiet, got like 100% positive feedback for having that, for being able to hear a person with mental illness speak, as well as a family member, has always been the favorite part of that training. It really makes that human contact much more palpable. So that's going on too.
Absolutely. It's such a good strategy to find that common ground and remind people it's a genetic lottery, that you never know what you'll get. That's life. So public television is getting ready to start a huge multi-year program that deals with youth and mental illness. Thank you, Gary, for that comment. And Christine, I've talked to many CIT officer trainings and feel this is a great program. CIT does seem to get rave reviews across the board. Yeah, that's the crisis intervention team for those who are unfamiliar. And that happens when law enforcement officers, sometimes members of the courts or corrections, get 40 hours or more of training on de-escalating situations in which mental illness is a factor. And it's very, very effective. So I'm glad you're involved with that, Carter, and other NAMI members. All right, we've got 5 minutes left. So I don't see any additional questions. Carter, do you have a closing statement you'd like to make?
Oh, I should have prepared something. I mean, I'm usually not at a loss for words, but I really am very touched that you had me as a speaker. I hope that people can, spread the word, and that this on Facebook can get, reposted and whatnot. I would just say, one of the NAMI saying is to never give up hope. And sometimes I've actually had the passing thought that something as horrible as this schizophrenia could affect our family out of nowhere. Maybe something really great out of nowhere, could also come to pass. So I am hopeful that there's going to be medical breakthroughs. I'm very hopeful that things are going to change as the public continues to get more educated about what mental illness is and how it affects all of us. Keep reading, keep educating yourselves, and supporting each other. Some of my best friends are moms who have sons with schizophrenia, so we've formed a very, very tight bond, and that's invaluable.
Mm-hmm. I love that statement. I've heard people lament the people they lose when a mental illness or trauma burns out a friendship, and I've had that experience as well. But what I've found is that you will find new friends. You'll find a new family in a way, and they're people who've been through their ringers and come out with superpowers like empathy and wisdom and insight. Um, so yeah, it's many trade-offs, but there are blessings. Um,
And I've spoken to a number of people with mental illness in recovery and very functioning and stable, who also said that what really did keep them going was a family member or a peer, somebody who never gave up hope on them. Even if they weren't able to articulate it at the time, it really made a difference to not be abandoned.
Absolutely. Having one person believe in you goes a long, long, long way.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I think we're almost at the point of wrapping up. Another Thursday evening has flown by, and I want to thank our guests and thanks Carter and our volunteers for being here tonight. Thanks for sharing your story and being so transparent and vulnerable with us. Please be well ahead in the next week, everyone. And be sure to tune in. We've got another great author lined up next week, Carla Carlisle, author of Journey to the Sun, SON, the dramatic story of a mother, African-American successful woman who adopted a son and within a year had the birth mother come back to reclaim him, and the dramatic story that ensued. It's a very, very dramatic, page-turning novel. She has a wonderful story. I'm excited to have her. And then the last Thursday of the month, we will have a discussion of the LGBTQ community, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer community, and mental health. A lot of interrelationship there, and we've got some great speakers who will be sharing their story and their insights. Okay, so in the week ahead, please do what you need to do, go where you need to go, and be safe. Thanks again for joining us, everyone. And thanks, Carter.
Thank you.
Okay, it was wonderful to meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye.